This episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast is brought to you by DeviceTalks Tuesdays. Join us every Tuesday at 4 p.m. for great medtech conversations. Go to DeviceTalks.com to register. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome to this week's episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. It's great to have you here. Got so much going on. Angelique Johnson, the CEO of MEMstim, will be giving the closing keynote. We're going to talk to her about her path to entrepreneurship, her work in co-founding MedtechColor, and an upcoming pitch contest that MedtechColor is organizing. Go to medtechcolor.org for more information. Do it quickly. They have a deadline coming up. We're also going to speak with Kaila Krum of Truist Securities. Kaila was nice enough to visit, talk to us about Q4 results, and revisit the results of a survey that Truist conducted of hospitals, asking them about their elective surgery expectations. Finally, Pharma Editor Brian Buntz is on the show. He's going to talk about a recent experience he had testing out Dexcom's continuous glucose monitor. I'm here with my colleagues, Chris Newmarker, the Executive Editor of Life Sciences at Mass Device, and our Pharma Editor Brian Buntz is returning to the podcast with a new headset. Brian, let the folks hear your voice.
How's it going? How's the new headset sound?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Sounds great. Chris Newmarker, what do you think?
Sounded good. It's like we're all just in the same room right now.
It is. We are a close-knit, virtual, distant organization, but we've got a lot of news to cover today. Chris has once again come with a full 5 Newmarker's newsmakers, and we'll spread those over, sprinkle them liberally over this podcast. And Brian, you've got a very cool story you posted this week about using Dexcom's continuous glucose monitor, and thought it was an interesting analysis of yours. So we'll get into that in a moment.
You know, Tom, what do you think of Tom Brady?
That's a great question, Chris Newmarker. I'm happy for Tom Brady. For those who aren't aware, I'm up in New England, and I'm more of a Red Sox fan than a Patriots fan, but it's hard not to be a fan of a football team that's won a gajillion Super Bowls over the past 2 decades.
Yeah, they've won a few Super Bowls over the years.
They've done okay.
Yeah.
And they said, you know what? You go, Tom. We'll be fine without you. And they weren't. And I'm happy for him. I think it'll be a good Super Bowl for sure. And he beat Aaron Rodgers, which is always a good thing.
It's just a wealth of good news with football, right? Yeah.
Yes. I'm sure there are a number of Buccaneer fans now who don't believe that Tom Brady is a cheater. So I'm glad they came over to the good side. So anyway, let's get into our Newmarker's newsmakers. Chris, what's number 5?
Oh, number 5 on the list is Titan Medical closed a $11.5 million offering. This was in Canada. It was just a private placement in the United States. But some good news for Titan. They last year they announced a partnership, to work with Medtronic on robotic surgery technology, and it looks like they're moving forward, raising some more money, continuing to compete in this really hot space right now. I mean, Intuitive is still the dominant company. You got these huge companies like Medtronic and Johnson & Johnson, ready to get into robotic surgery, but some money raised for Titan.
I think we need to start having some Jeopardy categories on these, because we're having some common themes, surgical robotics being one. So we've covered that. Now let's look up at the board, and the next one is SPACs. SPACs, what is number 4? It's a special purpose acquisition company story, Chris.
Yeah, I'll take a special purpose acquisition for $500, 500 points. I forget, was it dollars or points on Jeopardy? It's been a while. So
I thought it was Brian.
Dollars.
Brian, any insights?
I think it's dollars, right?
Yeah, I believe it's dollars. Okay.
Yes, I'll take a special acquisition deal for $500. But we've got the Butterfly Network naming a CEO right before they are doing a merger with Longview Acquisition, so that they can combine and go public. Their new CEO is going to be Dr. Todd Fruchterman. Hopefully I pronounced that right. He previously spent 10 years at 3M. He was president and general manager of the company's medical solutions, division. He's also held, roles at other companies, including Johnson & Johnson. So experienced medtech executive taking over Butterfly Network. They've got this transducer using semiconductor technology that allows you to do a whole body image using a single handheld probe. It sounds like a very cool technology. And I know the news of this upcoming, going public news is beginning a lot of views on Mass Device. So it's obviously a company to watch in the industry.
All right. Well, we still have lots up on the board. We've got racketeering, transformation, and of course, COVID-19. But first, before we continue on our new marketers, newsmakers, Jeopardy edition. Check in with Brian. Brian, you had an interesting experience recently. You wrote about it this week. I was going to say the experience this week, but you had the opportunity to try a continuous glucose monitor from Dexcom. How did this opportunity come to you?
So I think Chris got an email talking about their Hello Dexcom program, sent it my way, and then I responded to the original sender of the email, and they offered to send me one, and they sent me one within days. Then I kind of sat on it for a week or two. I was a little bit apprehensive to strap something to my belly for 10 days, but then right around Christmas or maybe just after, I put it on, and it's an interesting time to wear a CGM because I think everybody's probably glucose tolerance is impaired somewhat after the holidays. Yeah. So I saw some numbers that were a little bit scary, but I think it still was normal-ish. And I had a doctor kind of review the figures after, and he said that it was boring. So that was, I guess, good to hear. But it was interesting just seeing that data. So I had it set up so that on my screen on my phone, every 5 minutes you see a number, and it's kind of addictive. It's you're going up a hill and you're wondering how's my glucose going down? And you can see patterns about how it changes. You can see that if you go for a walk, it'll go down. If you go for a jog, it'll go up. Certain things are a little bit, we're a learning curve for me. So I found out that if you're doing kind of moderate or intense exercise, it goes up because your body needs the glucose. So you free up a lot. So you can get spikes. But if you want to bring it down, I saw a lot of pre-diabetics and diabetics recommend walking after eating. It's a way to kind of bring it down. So maybe you need to have less insulin if you're a diabetic.
You are a healthy individual. You don't have diabetes, correct?
Yeah, but I don't know, middle-aged territory. I think everybody's kind of glucose tolerance goes downhill with age. But I think overall it was pretty good.
We're all here with you, Brian. We're all here with you.
It was at times there were spikes when I had a dessert early on that were high enough to convince me to have fewer sweets.
So what went into putting it on? Was it how is it? What was that process like? Was it easy enough?
It's pretty easy. So they have this applicator device. It's kind of like a computer mouse. You have a little plastic tab. You bend it back and forth. You put it on your belly and then or your arm, or this depends on where you want to put it. But you hit a button and then it injects into your skin. It's not all the way. I think it's in the subcutaneous layer, the interstitial layer. But you can barely feel it. It's kind of you go to a good nurse and you get a shot that you can barely feel. It goes in, but you can't really feel much unless you're pushing on it or something happens. You have somebody, I don't know, push on your belly, it might hurt. But it's barely there. I guess it also is kind of interesting, rethinking showering. It's now I have to tape it up, stuff like that you wouldn't think of as a non-diabetic or a non-CGM wearer.
Interesting.
How about while you slept, you kept it on it's on for the entire 10 days?
You can't really move it. Once it's on, it's kind of on for 10 days unless you choose to divert early. And I think the new one, the G7 coming out, can be on for 14, 15 days. But the G6 is designed for the 10-day wear. And then you get all the data pushed to an app, and there's a second app you can get called Insight, and you can pull reports. So you can look at your trend curve from one day versus the other. You can crunch numbers. You can look at your average over the course of a few days, over the course of 2 weeks. There's lots of tools you can go in. You can pull PDFs and you can send them to a doctor if you want to do that.
It sounds like you got some really cool insights just as somebody who doesn't have diabetes. I would have to think that if someone actually had diabetes, this would be. It sounds like it'd be really empowering.
Well, I think there's this issue called hypo-unawareness. So your blood sugar can go down at night. like to dangerous territory if you're a diabetic, and you may not know about it. And sometimes if they get severe enough, you eventually have symptoms. But I think when it gets to the moderate range, like you can feel normal. But if you get like really low, you can end up like confused, and you can, I'm not a diabetic, so I don't know exactly, but it can be a kind of like minor emergency or major emergency. So with the CGM, one of the chief selling points early on for diabetics is it lets you know when you're entering that territory. So you can, I guess if it's more mild, you can have like honey or some kind of like sweet food. And if it's more severe, you have to have like a drug called, or it's a hormone called glucagon that your body normally produces to raise it back up. But I could imagine it could really help you kind of get a grip on your levels. And I talked to one doctor who's a advisor to Dexcom, and he was saying that he sees his patients like blood sugar go down over time wearing one, just because you get more insights and you can learn how to manage it over time. So you can either get smarter about how you use insulin, or you can start doing things like improving your exercise, diet, and so forth to improve your numbers.
I was just saying, like, one thing I liked about your story was that, I mean, there were a lot of like really cool things that you found out about the Dexcom CGM, but I mean, you also like were able to point out some challenges around the device. I mean, what were some of those things that you noticed?
Well, one of the first things, like being that I'm in California, and like recycling is kind of like mandatory. Like we separate our trash into 3 buckets. One of them is compost, one of them is recycling, one of them is like goes to landfill. But one of the first things you notice is you put on this device, and like the applicator is like the size of a computer mouse, and you're meant to throw it away every time, like not recycle it. And I did check into it, and the company has looked into recycling it, but I think with the blood contact or whatever, it's kind of questionable how you would do that. But just, I don't know, being someplace where you have to recycle, it's kind of a question mark. I'm throwing this away every 10 days, like this chunk of plastic. And then, also the cost. Obviously, it's a medical device, so it's not going to cost the same as like a fitness catch or something. But and it can be covered oftentimes by insurance or perhaps Medicare. I need to check into the reimbursement. But I think for some patients, they have to pay out of pocket, and it's an investment if you pay out of pocket. It's like a $100 plus per sensor, and then you have to have a transmitter. And then some people have a separate device that they use in conjunction with it to calibrate it with finger sticks. So all in all, it can be kind of pricey. It can be in the hundreds of dollars a month kind of territory for if you pay all of it out of pocket. But at the same time, I almost think that people who are non-diabetic, especially pre-diabetic, could get a lot out of it just to give it a whirl for like 10 days. So maybe they could try it out if they're in, especially with COVID. Like you usually go to the doctor to get your A1C levels. You do like they do a blood draw and they analyze your numbers, and all that obviously requires like driving into some place, being around people. With the CGM, you can do it all yourself and see it in your phone and share your numbers via email if you have to. And you can get an average over 10 days of your numbers. You can see patterns.
Yeah, I could see it. Like if I gave that a whirl, like I could like cue myself into bad habits or whatnot. And as you said, like I could, make sure to have like half a bowl of ice cream, after dinner versus a full bowl.
For me, it's like a more inspiring device than like a Fitbit, what gives you like in some cases pulse or steps or activity levels or whatever, because you can kind of get a clearer sense of what's happening with your metabolism. And I've heard of people like Timothy Ferriss and stuff like that who are using it as a non-diabetic to enhance like diet and exercise. And I think I saw a blog from like 10, 15 years ago from Timothy Ferriss who tried one out, but he was saying that it's overly simplified, but when your sugar spikes up or whatever, it has a tendency to make you fat because your body has to break that down and store the glucose, I believe this is right, back into your fat. So anyway, it's probably overly simplistic, but I think there is a connection. If your sugar goes up to like high territory often, it can be perhaps more challenging to maintain weight. So that's one of the things you can do is like keep an eye on your numbers and know kind of what your triggers are, and then use that to make changes.
The article is called "How CGMs Can Inspire Lifestyle Changes." How long since you've removed it, and what sort of lifestyle changes have you adopted?
It's been maybe 2 weeks that I've not been using it, and it's convinced me to take up like every day some kind of physical activity, like jogging. I was doing biking, and then to watch kind of like diet, like to make sure I don't have like really refined carbs, which I don't plan on doing permanently. Occasionally I might have something that's like an exception to that, but that'll be kind of like the main focus is like just keeping an eye on diet, and then special occasions you might diverge from it, but for the most part, I don't really want to go back to eating like junk food unless it's really worth it. So
cool.
People should definitely check it out. Chris, where's that running?
Hey, that's on our site, Drug Delivery Business News, and we also have the article stubbed on mass device and medical design and outsourcing. And
we'll have a link to it on the podcast notes as well. Great. All right. Now it is time to get into our first interview. Chris Newmarker and I speak with Kaila Krum. She's the managing director at Truist Securities. We're going to hit upon the Q2 numbers and talk about a recent hospital survey that Truist conducted. Let's listen.
Exactly. It's earnings season. Let's see what she has to say.
Hey, before we start this interview, I want to introduce everyone to Carl Hewitt. Carl is the head of design and innovation at Sagentia. He'll be presenting on our DeviceTalks Tuesday that's coming up this Tuesday, along with Martin Mitchell, the head of human factors at Sagentia. They'll be talking about virtual user-centered design. And I asked just a few minutes ago why this topic was so important.
Modern day, 2020, 2021, traditionally, a lot of those user-centered methodologies required face-to-face interaction, cognitive walkthroughs, observations to really unlock those unknown unknowns. And like any industry, the world pandemic has just thrown that into chaos, and we've all had to adapt. And one way to adapt is transitioning this into more virtual forum. Everyone's using Mural, everyone's using webinars like we are now to converse. And how much of that can be applied to still elicit the sort of feedback and unknown unknowns and user insights to really inform that decision.
So don't miss Carl and Martin's presentation this Tuesday at 4 p.m. Go to DeviceTalks.com to register. Well, Kaila Krum, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Tom. It's good to be back.
All right. Well, it's a busy week with quarterly reports coming in. Chris Newmarker, you have been covering these reports. Kaila, you're sitting in on all these exhaustive analyst calls. So it'd be great to get your insights on where we're at. Chris, you covered Stryker last night. What was your any questions for Kaila on the company?
Kaila, I'd really like to get your read on this. I really had a sense during last evening's earnings call that they sounded incredibly optimistic that everything's going to recover a lot later this year. I mean, they were even saying that, even if the second quarter ends up, still being really tough with the pandemic, they think that the recovery will be enough. They're going to meet their projections. I mean, did you get a similar type of read on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Chris. I mean, it's been a whirlwind year with a lot of volatility, and this most recent quarter has been no exception. But I mean, on Stryker specifically, I mean, this is a company I cover with a phenomenal management team. It has proven its ability to execute in a really tough environment. But to your point, a big portion of their business is tied to elective procedures, and it decelerated from third quarter levels in the fourth quarter. I think for them, similar to J&J and others that have released results, they do expect some lingering effects and procedure delays will continue into January. And again, that's what we're hearing from other companies in our survey work. But there is a lot of optimism that things can get back to somewhat normal, whatever normal looks like, in the second part of this year.
Normal enough that people, feel comfortable and safe to, go in for a knee replacement, and the hospital has the resources to actually do it. Tell us a little bit more about, the survey work that you've done, because it's kind of, you've had some, recent, surveys that kind of, back up this, what the companies are saying, that, the hospitals are really ready to, recover a ton of procedures, once we hopefully get a vaccine rolled out and get this pandemic more under control.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge for us is this sort of intra-quarter opaqueness. And generally, investors, companies, I'm sure you all, we're typically going to conferences to get data points to understand how things are trending and predict businesses. But we've had to kind of adjust and get a little quirky and creative with the way that we do research. So, I mean, last week, myself, my team, Dave Ruscott, Sam Berdovsky, we literally called 30 of the top 100 hospitals in the U.S. because what better way to figure out if hospitals are scheduling elective procedures than to simply call them and ask. And what we learned is that many hospitals did effectively shut down in December and even early January, but many are back to rescheduling cases now. About 20% of the hospitals we called did have some sort of limitations in place, and some were, leaving the scheduling to the surgeon's discretion. So we got a lot of great feedback, questions, comments about that effort. But to your point, it's really only one part of the equation. I mean, surgeons, have to be doing procedures, and hospitals have to be taking in patients, but patients have to seek out the surgeon as well. And if, consumers are nervous to go into the hospital, those procedures don't happen. So our pharma team actually did a really great survey of about 1,500 adults, consumer adults, and we included a question about elective procedure volumes and asked people, did you plan to have an elective procedure in 2020, like a knee replacement? And if you did, what happened? Did you actually have it done? And what we found is that, out of the people who plan to have a procedure, about 30% still haven't had that procedure done. So it creates this backlog effect going into 2021.
So how does that factor in how things are looking for the coming year? Because you had issued a report on J&J on their call. We can maybe delve into that a little bit. But in that, you said that they were initially that the quarter, it's just the management indicated that the recovery experience in the third quarter faded in December due to softness in the market. So, I mean, this was something that I think people were hoping against. Was it as bad as people feared, or was it right on line with expectations, the procedures and the business in the second quarter?
Yeah, I mean, the procedure restrictions, tied to COVID really did pick up in December, and the headlines have been out there. So many investors had been expecting that the quarter would be impacted in some way. And effectively, and that is what we saw from a procedure standpoint. The majority of companies I cover, many executed well, navigated the challenges, but they hurdled a lot of procedure cancellations at year end. And so it is a concept that a lot of investors are talking about, because as those procedures come back, as volumes recover, companies may experience higher revenue, and perhaps for that reason, they want to own the stock. So everyone's trying to figure out when this backlog may be coming. And again, what we have found in our survey is that, people are trying to reschedule their procedure for the first part of 2021. And so, I think that's an interesting data point.
How do things look going forward in the other companies you've covered? You said you've received indication from the companies as to where their numbers might be. What are you anticipating the next week and a half or 2 weeks of quarterly reports looking like in terms of positive, negative, mixed?
I mean, what we're seeing across our list, and over half of our companies have pre-announced results at this point. So we have a good, I'd say, sense of what had happened in the fourth quarter. It does seem like, some companies benefited from a little bit of backlog in the third quarter that continued into October, slowed down in November, and further decelerated in December. But we've been pleasantly surprised with how well the capital environment has held up in some categories. I mean, Stryker, you'd mentioned earlier, Stryker sold over 100 robots in the fourth quarter, which is pretty incredible at a time where budgets are challenged and these robots are still getting prioritized. And procedures done in the outpatient setting, those also seem to be holding up fairly well, or at least getting rescheduled a little bit more quickly than others.
I mean, Stryker, had a tough year last year, like any ortho company, but I kind of noticed they performed a lot better than their competitors through this crisis. I mean, how much of a role did Mako play in that?
I mean, I think that Mako certainly played a big role. And I think that there's originally most analysts, most investors, including myself, were pretty skeptical that robotics would continue to be a priority for the hospital system during such a challenging time. But it really has been a priority. And, we've talked to a lot of hospital execs about this. I think that orthopedics tend to be sort of a profitability driver within a hospital. And so, as these procedures recover, as they come back, ultimately hospitals want to attract those profitable cases to their hospital systems. And what better way, I guess, to do that than with a robotic system? So I certainly think that it's played a role.
Yeah, it's interesting right now because J&J, they just recently rolled out their new ortho robot. They were talking it up a bit during their earnings call. Smith and Nephew had a next gen system that they rolled out last year in the middle of the pandemic. And Zimmer Biomet, of course, has the ROSA system. I mean, how much are they going to be able to kind of compete against Stryker on this, or does Stryker kind of like have this dominant position now that's going to be hard to topple?
It certainly is going to be an interesting dynamic to monitor. In either case, I certainly think this year is going to be noisy from a competitive standpoint in large joint ortho robotics. But I also think that Stryker owns Mako, not only for that large joint business. Over time, I fully expect Stryker will innovate, continue to roll out different indications with its robotic system.
Something they were really talking up a lot during the earnings call last night was their OrthoSensor acquisition, and I've heard talk that the Zimmer Biomet call in a week is going to be really interesting because they've got plans around smart knee implants. I mean, is this kind of a new trend to watch out for?
It absolutely is. I think OrthoSensor is a great deal for Stryker, and I think that Zimmer, to your point, has been talking more and more about sort of the value behind smart implants. And I think that within large joints, there's been this question of how do you continue to innovate when long-term results are still fairly good. There's good outcomes in the knee segment, in the hip segment. And so how do you innovate and make these procedures better? Because patients still, even with what on paper looks to be good outcomes, a lot of patients still don't feel like they have a natural feeling knee. And so how do you innovate to make these things better? And so ultimately, I do think that smart implants will play a role in that category.
Do you track, I'm curious, we're in vaccination season. Are you at all monitoring how the medtechs are doing in getting their employees monitored, where they may be in the list, vaccinated, where they may be on the list, and how that might impact finances going forward? Is that a metric or questions at least that you're asking about, or is that too far afield?
It's a good question. I think from what we've heard from our companies, every company wants to ensure that the hospital providers are getting vaccinated, that their sales reps who are visiting these hospitals are getting vaccinated, and ultimately looking out for the best case for their patients, just ensuring that people stay safe. And I think that a lot of companies have had to adjust over the last 12 months with virtual meetings and having these virtual sessions for sales reps. But I do think that ultimately, hopefully as soon as things kind of get back to semi-normal and people do get vaccinated, we can get back to sort of live meetings, live in-person events, and sales reps can sell product as normal.
I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to some coffee meetings later this year.
Me too. Absolutely. Anything in person.
Great.
Exactly. Just to kind of wrap up, anything that you're especially watching out for as we continue this earnings season?
Certainly more data points just around procedure trends in January, how they're moving into February, and whether or not small cap companies choose to provide guidance for their business. Because many small cap companies had pulled guidance during the pandemic, and I think we're optimistic that they would be able to guide for their businesses in 2021 before sort of the challenges of December. So, J&J gave us guidance, Stryker's given us guidance, but, we'll have to see over the next month how things change, how they evolve, if other companies will feel confident putting numbers behind their businesses this year. So those are things that certainly we'll be monitoring.
How has the lack of guidance impacted your ability to do your job? How much more difficult is it without that information from the companies?
Frankly, it's made the job a lot more fun, but it does create challenges. It does create challenges in the way that, consensus, for example, commonly, investors will refer to a consensus number that is essentially, my estimate pooled with a million other analyst estimates. And at this point, the range of estimates is all over the place. And so, you have to be pretty good at predicting businesses, but also there's a lot of sort of intra-quarter opaqueness, as I mentioned. So we have to get creative in reaching out and doing our research and ultimately putting numbers behind these businesses. So it definitely has been a very interesting dynamic, but I do think that as guidance comes out, as more and more companies feel confident giving guidance, we will see that range narrow, and that sort of predictability should be helpful in our space.
Excellent. Well, Kaila, we always appreciate your thoughts. You're always welcome in the podcast. Thanks for taking the time today.
It was good to catch up with you guys, and nice to meet you, Chris, over the phone.
Yeah, you too. This was great.
And we're back. It's always great to hear from Kaila Krum. But now it's back to Newmarkers, Newsmakers, Jeopardy! Chris, what's the next category?
I'll take a racketeering lawsuit for $1,000. Ding! We got a federal judge here where I am in Minnesota. The judge decided that Mylan is going to have to face a lawsuit accusing it of paying bribes and kickbacks to pharmacy benefit managers. It's being accused of conspiring to fix prices on its EpiPen device. Which, if anyone doesn't know what an EpiPen is, it's a really crucial device for people who have severe allergies. This isn't the first time Mylan's faced some criticism over how it handles EpiPen sales. So we'll see where this case goes here in Minnesota.
The EpiPen too is back in the news with COVID-19 with the vaccines.
Oh yeah,
perhaps like 5 to 10 people out of a million have like these severe reactions to the shots. I think especially from the both mRNA ones that are out there. But the EpiPen is a way to deal with it. If somebody goes into the anaphylactic shock, you give them a dose of ephedrine.
If I recall, so far, at least in most of those cases where there's been those reactions, they were people who had EpiPens. So that's why we it's thankfully like keeping like the death count down from vaccine side effects. So.
Do those people have a standing allergy that will have the EpiPen? So there's something going on, but is there one common allergy that's caused those reactions? Was it shellfish or something?
I think from what I saw, there was no clear cause yet. There were some theories about different ingredients in the vaccines that were triggering it, but I think it was uncertain.
All right, Chris, you have 2 tiles left on the board.
All right.
You can choose transformation officer or COVID-19 vaccine again.
Oh, let's mix it up. I'll take transformation officer for $2,000 at Zimmer Biomet. They named they have a newly created position of chief transformation officer. They brought in Ellie Humphrey, who has over the years held several leadership positions at Medtronic, including Vice President of Enterprise Excellence and Business Transformation. And I mean, Zimmer Biomet in recent years under Brian Hansen, they've been going through like a really big reorganization, really trying to recast the company. I mean, this seems to be a good sign that they decided they actually really needed somebody who was like, hey, they're the chief transformation officer. Like, so they obviously decided they needed some extra leadership here, management, really.
All right, well, that's great news for Zimmer. We'll see what comes of that news. And Chris, what is our number one Newmarkers? And it's a daily double. Actually, it's not a daily double. This is Tom. Our last Newmarkers Newsmakers was a long discussion about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because we thought it would come out next week. But of course, it came out today on Friday. So we decided just to set all aside our big, deep thoughts on the expected results and just go right into our keynote conversation with Angelique Johnson. She's the CEO of MEMstim. Well, Angelique Johnson, welcome to the podcast.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad that you reached out and I'm happy to connect.
Great. We have a lot to talk about. I want to talk about the MedtechColor Pitch Competition. The deadline on that is coming up. But I do like to start these conversations normally finding out how people got into the medtech industry. And we'll cover that in a second. But I was reading an article about you, and it seemed timely given all the trouble we have with the pandemic, with schooling, more kids at home. My child is homeschooling. You were homeschooled as a child, is that correct?
Yeah.
Your entire time, or?
I think my memory serves me correct in getting to that age now. From, I think, first grade all the way through. I was homeschooled. So before NTI was a thing.
And your parents had a science and mathematics background, correct?
Yeah, they did. And my mom, she really wanted to give us kind of an educational experience that she felt the school system wouldn't, where, of course, as you can see, I'm African-American, and she didn't feel like the school system was actually doing a great job of educating us, and some of the barriers we had, and there's a sense of lower expectation if you were African-American going into the school system. So she kind of pulled us out and said, hey, I can get you guys going on my own. And the people she homeschooled, a good number of us actually went on to get our PhD in engineering. So she must have done something right.
That's amazing. That's outstanding. Yeah, my wife doesn't have a mathematics background, so I'm not sure what we'll do once we get up to that level. But anyway, let's get into what happened after the homeschooling. How did you find your way into the medtech industry?
Yeah, when I was always fascinated, even when I was younger, with the combination of technology and the body. I don't know. In my mind, I didn't think I was a Trekkie and into cyborgs, but somehow maybe that's where I picked it up. I don't know. But I just always wanted to kind of sort of hack the body in that way and do the impossible. That was kind of it. Like I saw the limitation of, even at that time, surgeries and pharmaceuticals. And, I'd ask them, why is somebody blind? Well, because there's no drug for that. And now with my company, MEMstim, I'm able to do those things that as a child, I asked, why can't somebody walk? Can't they just go into the hospital and get a surgery and walk? No, they're not able to walk that way. So
interesting. So a number of people, or a percentage of people I talked to, came into this thinking first they'd be doctors. They wanted to be involved with the medical part, but it sounds more like you came in it from a technical perspective. You wanted to bring technology into medicine.
Yeah, I got my degree in computer engineering in undergraduate, but I knew from the moment I signed up to get that degree, I had no interest in making smaller, faster computers. I just had no attraction to that. And so I was always, biomedical engineering was still relatively new at that time. So, maybe a decade or more as an established discipline you could get a major in. So I did computer engineering, electrical engineering, but I just remember always trying to find internships. I went to MIT and Caltech and just different institutions, Case Western, and always trying to figure out my own way. Like, well, how do you combine technology and the nervous system? In particular, I was really interested in nerves and neurons because it controls everything that we do, think, feel. So
how did that ultimately lead to your starting MEMstim?
So I was in my last year of my PhD program. Not the best time to start a company, but everybody around me was really kind of, at Michigan, I was at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Everybody had the entrepreneurial bug. And I would hear my peers kind of going out and, at least doing pitch competitions and thinking about starting a business. And they would go out to interview for an industry job, nothing to do with a startup. And they would say, yeah, I talked about my entrepreneurial experience and they were really wowed. And so I said, oh, wait, maybe I should put that on my CV. So I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I did not intend to start a med tech business. I just intended to get some entrepreneurial experience as probably more so of a class endeavor. But through that experience, I really kind of latched on to this idea. We got a lot of great feedback, just from having investors and different, even the corporations that we were seeking to target. And from there, just say, hey, well, let's launch into an actual company.
So what does MEMstim do now?
Yeah, so now we are doing innovative manufacturing for neural stimulator leads, and call it neural stimulators. You can call it electroceuticals. You can call it neural implants. That has a whole host of names. They're pretty much electronics that you place inside the body. Mm-hmm. Most people are familiar with pacemakers. So you can think pacemaker-like devices that go all over your body to stimulate the nerves or neurons. So it can be for hearing loss. It can be for chronic pain, heart failure, Parkinson's, tremors, epilepsy. They're using these devices now for PTSD, at least studying the use of it for PTSD, stimulating even for diabetes. And looking at some early studies around that as well. So we make not the complete device, but we actually make the lead. So right now it's a bundle of wires that is coated in silicone and it's placed by the nerves. But we actually 3D print that same technology, which allows us to do cool things like make elastic metal, which is super critical because if you put a device in your brain, you want it to be durable enough to survive. You don't want someone to have to go in there and take it out when it breaks.
Good thought. So you've started with cochlear implants? Is that still your primary focus?
Yeah, that exactly. That was our primary focus. It was a spin out for my dissertation work. And we started out there because it was the most challenging. Now, in hindsight, I know a lot about entrepreneurship, so probably that wasn't the best idea. But still being an academic in mindset, you say, well, let's start with the most challenging one, because all of these devices stem from the cochlear implant, from more or less, right? So with cochlear implants, they have the most electrodes, but they have the smallest. Well, these have the most, but now they still have the smallest electrodes, and they have to fit in a really small spiral-shaped bone inside the ear. And so we knew that if we could create a really small device that was durable, that you could manufacture with automated manufacturing, and have it work for cochlear implants, then it was just going to be so much exponentially easier to do spinal cord stimulators and deep brain stimulators and pacemakers, because they're just much larger devices. So we're definitely still heavily focused on cochlear implants, but also now looking at things like, percutaneous paddle leads. So because we make really elastic, thin technology, rolling up a paddle lead and putting it in through a needle versus having to do an open surgery, which can have surgical complications and also lowers the adoption rate of that technology.
Going back to the starting of your company, I mean, I think everyone has, at least I have probably on one or two occasions thought, I really would like to start my own thing, but I've never had either the courage or just the putting enough care aside to do it. But you did. What would you, going back, would you have done it the way you did it? Are you happy? You're obviously happy with the way it turned out, but would you have done anything differently in starting MEMstim?
I would have, well, for one, I started in 2011, and it really wasn't until 2015, probably tail end of 2014, that I actually started. It was an idea. Like I said, kind of an academic venture. I went out into the world, did other things in academia. And finally, it occurred to me after people came, are you guys going to develop this or not? Hey, can we get this technology or not? In 2014, said, okay, let's just go for it. And so what I would say is, I would go back and I probably would have just gone for it earlier. Yeah. I wouldn't have wasted those years. But the other thing I would have done differently is when I was the idea really generated through my dissertation. It generated in the academic world, which is where a lot of technology starts. I would have thought from the very first day I started my research at the university, how do I make this in a large scale manufacturing facility, which would have totally changed the materials that I use. It would have totally changed. I would have thought a price point. I wouldn't have used tools that were highly expensive and restrictive. I wouldn't have used tools that relied on toxic gases that needed all this infrastructure. So we shifted away from traditional microfabrication when we pushed our minds to say, how can we do this with the lowest cost, with the least amount of tools? And we end up in the 3D printing world. And then finding that with some things that aren't as sexy, right? Injection molding. So we do micro injection molding. It's not sexy, but it actually is much more efficient and much better than what we were doing in the microfabrication world when you're talking about making durable, elastic implants that need to survive for 10, 20, 30 years in the body. So I would have thought manufacturing first instead of thinking, I'll make something really sexy that has all these features, and then I'll figure out how to make it. And that was a bad idea. That's just a bad idea.
Did you have a network of folks to advise you?
I had a lot of mentors starting out in the process. And by and large, they were general business mentors, or they were in the kind of specific tech mentor. The other thing that's different now, as I grew and I became a more mature, like I said, I was accidental. So I had to learn by not, just fumbling around. And so as I got more mature and grew, I came to realize that, you needed specific people in a very defined space. So now I have some really great connections and advisors that are specifically in the space that I'm working in, that have a specific expertise. So when they give me business advice, they know what they're talking about. And that's really critical, especially coming out of the university system. There's a lot of people that help you and they want to help you. Their heart is good and in the right place, but you really need to be focused on what is your target market and who are the players in the space. And when I say specific, I mean the former president of a company that we want to be acquired by. That those are the people that we have advising us now that I didn't give enough credit to in the beginning, finding those individuals.
And last question about MEMstim, what do you hope MEMstim will be in 4 or 5 years?
So we really want MEMstim to be kind of this umbrella company, but we're creating divisions within it. So the cochlear implant is a division that we hope to exit out of, right? So we want to generate the technology, the platform around it, the infrastructure, and then be able to sell that off, and then move into the spinal cord stimulator space and do the same. Now, there are companies out there like Integer, right, that operate somewhat very similar in that way. And so MEMstim was certainly, exit to a company like that as well. We are a startup. We're in the business of exiting. We're not in the business of, staying in this forever. So, but those companies are few and far between. And so because there's this kind of divide in the med tech space, we really want to be in a position to have maybe even several acquisitions under an umbrella company, or maybe one large acquisition. But we very much so have we're again, a traditional startup. We want to be acquired. We don't want to be in here for life. But because we had a platform technology, it was important for us not to go for everything at once, but to focus. So we focus on the cochlear implant. We're at the point now where we're saying, okay, we actually generated really great technology there. Maybe this is a good inflection point to start shifting into the spinal cord stimulator market, so that we can work in that before we launch into another market.
So let's cut over to MedtechColor. First, the organization. When did that come together? I think you're the first representative we've had from that group on the podcast. What's the origin story?
So as I refer, I don't know if he would refer to himself as this, but I refer to him as the visionary founder, Pharma Editor, who's dynamic. He, was really an idea that God inspired him with, truly, to have a medtech organization specifically focused on medtech experts, medtech execs, medtech founders of color, and even more specifically focused, at least in the early stages of the organization, on Black and Brown executives, founders, and the like. So Kwame just reached out, and he had a really great Rolodex of people. I mean, we have some phenomenal founding members, and he just brought us all together. And really, we said, hey, what are the target areas that we want to hit? One, of course, being increasing the number of Black executives in medtech. So that's a big thing for us, identifying too as well. The other thing is increasing the number of Black medtech startups, so Black and Brown medtech startups. That we'll talk about. The pitch competition kind of gets into that, and getting access to capital for those startups. And again, those startups then become CEOs of their own companies, and kind of tie into the first initiative. And then also looking at clinical studies. There's a huge issue with underrepresentation of African Americans in many clinical trials. And so we want to increase that by obviously recognizing that some of that comes from damage that's been done to confidence that African Americans have in clinical trials because of things like the Tuskegee experiment and all kinds of, forced sterilization. And so you have all these things that we want to hit head on, but also people doing the clinical trials, we can't negate this, are not actually aggressively looking to diversify that population pool. And due to genetics and all kinds of things, what works for one population, one ethnicity, is not necessarily just guaranteed to cross over into another one.
That's a big charter. I mean, I thought you were focused more on the startup aspect. I've talked to Boston Scientific about their Close the Gap program, which addresses the clinical trial element you're talking about. Do you really see MedtechColor as tackling those two issues, and others, I'm sure, as well?
Yeah, I mean, we have a really dynamic team, and the beauty of how Kwame brought everybody together. He brought together, individuals like myself who are very passionate, experienced in the startup world. And then he also brought in people that were very passionate, experienced in regulatory affairs and high up in those areas. And he brought together people that are doing, for example, Ibrahim, who is, Johnson & Johnson and, heading over innovation in that area, is bringing innovators and people that are tied to, corporations. So he's really brought in a diversity of individuals so that we could target these, seemingly separate areas, but having micro teams that are only going to grow as more and more members join, to be able to put some focus on what are the big issues around Black, that we have around, African American population in MedtechColor, as well as all individuals of color in this space. But we certainly know that, again, with African American population, Latinx population, that those are where you see some of the biggest disparities and biggest issues that need to be addressed.
Well, before we get into the pitch competition, just what problems did you experience that you hope MedtechColor will help solve, will maybe create some solutions for?
Yeah. Well, as a startup founder, especially as an African-American female startup founder, social capital is not capital is in short supply. and then on top of capital being short supply, and it's almost like which came first, the chicken and the egg, there's social capital. So there's being able to get into the rooms where the deals are happening, being able to get access to the individuals who are going to be able to really propel your startup further, be it whether it's in funding or whether it's a strategic partnership that you're forming with certain corporations or potential acquirers or customers. So MedtechColor, I really think is going to be able to address that by being sort of that, the friend of a friend. Because right now we don't have, by and large, a friend of a friend to call and say, hey, do you know the president of Medtronic? Can I get a hold of him? We don't have that. And so MedtechColor is building those relationships. And we've done excellently with that. Medtronic and Stryker and Boston Scientific, and just reaching out to those corporations, Johnson & Johnson, of course, coming in, Danaher, just all of this coming in and building those relationships on the strategic side is really important, so that then we can give people access to those partnerships who otherwise wouldn't have it. And then capital, of course, is I cannot say that enough, needing to get more access to capital. And that comes by putting more of a spotlight on medtech startups, with founders of color, Black and Latinx, that currently are doing great work, have phenomenal companies, but are not being seen because they're not being lifted up above kind of the haze.
Has MedtechColor seen a change over the past year since the killing of George Floyd caused the medtech industry to sort of step up and make statements which are important and great? But I'm wondering on a ground level, or have you sensed a change, or are things improving? Yeah,
I think there's definitely a change in desire. And true change takes time. Mm-hmm. So, we've been, I would say we're coming up on a year of awakening.
Yep.
Enlightenment around social justice issues. And, I think for many, many years, a lot of the large corporations and a lot of individuals always said, well, we have a focus on diversity in this. But I think this year there's probably an awakening of what the experience that perhaps their employee base, their talent pool, founders, strategic partners, there was an awakening of, oh, wait, we cared about that issue, but maybe we didn't understand how deeply rooted it was in systemic injustice. So what I think we're seeing now is a lot of corporations stepping up and saying, hey, we want to support this in a real way, in an actionable way, in a measurable way. And that is really encouraging. MedtechColor, of course, wants to help with that. We get a lot more, we've seen a lot more interaction and requests like, hey, how can we support what you're doing? The pitch competition, Johnson & Johnson supporting it, ResMed supporting it, having, all of these, hopefully pulling in more actually that we have, that are almost about to support it as well. And that's just the pitch competition. MedtechColor overall, just being so greatly supported, especially in this time, we're seeing a lot more, what I say, people kind of putting their money where their mouth is and saying, hey, we know it takes money to do all kinds of things. Why would we suddenly look to diversity or look to inclusion and think that that's something you just get for free?
Great point. Well, let's talk about the pitch contest. You've got a deadline coming up. It's I think you rolled this out in January, earlier this month. But tell us a bit about what the contest is. Tell us about the deadline coming up. How can people get involved?
Awesome. Well, I am so excited about this pitch competition. That's how I got started. Like, I was telling you earlier, I got started through pitch comp. I never would have started my company if it hadn't been for a pitch competition. It's a great way to get feedback from investors. It's a phenomenal opportunity to connect with strategics. And so we have started this competition, not just for the prize. The prize, we're giving out over $100,000 in cash prizes and also in-kind services. I think our top prize is $25,000, and that's just non-dilutive, income for that company. There's no strings attached. It's just, hey, here's something that might be enough to get into a patent, might be enough to help them get to a minimally viable prototype, depending on the company. But in addition to that, one thing that I think it is something I have been championing for years. And I haven't seen the needle move, and I'm glad that MedtechColor is now being a part of that needle moving, which is what you see in the automotive industry is a lot of supplier diversity and partnerships with larger corporations and minority suppliers. So they actually, in a sense, grooming their own diversity in their supply chain. You don't see that in the med tech space. And this competition, what's beautiful about it is Johnson & Johnson is actually, and I don't know if they would say this, so I'm hoping not get myself in trouble, but they're almost like making, a JLabs version, specifically to this competition. So in other words, we're going to have a series of master classes taught straight out of Johnson & Johnson. It's going to be talking about regulatory affairs, pricing. They're going to be talking about, company formation, how do you raise money and capital for your company? Well, it's not just the classes, but then the Johnson & Johnson talent, right? Their strategic partnership with MedtechColor is such that the 10 finalists that go through those master classes actually get access to the intimate relationship with Johnson & Johnson and further mentorship on the inside. And then this first time around, we're kind of launching with almost these soft partnerships. We really hope to see this even next year turning into we call it an immersive incubator. So instead of having an incubator where companies come through the competition and they go through a MedtechColor incubator and they're in our space, we're actually going to say, hey, who are you trying to be acquired by? Who are you trying to get as a strategic partner? Okay, why don't we incubate you inside of Johnson & Johnson? Because that's where you really want to be. Why don't we incubate you? And ResMed is doing a special prize. They're actually going to do that, have an opportunity for the winner of their special prize to actually come in and intimately get on the inside of ResMed. And so that, to me, just, maybe some founders don't, and starting out, don't realize the value of that. I believe most do. That is so much more valuable than the money. Because at the end of the day, you don't reach acquisition without the partnership, and you don't even know how to get to the revenue side unless you really understand the industry. And to be on the inside of that, it's just phenomenal.
So what does who should apply? What type of companies should apply, and how do they apply? And we'll have a URL and such on our podcast notes, so you don't have to read out websites, but give us a sense of the process.
So we are looking for Black and Latinx founders that are in the healthcare space. So that means you can have a healthcare technology. It could be, mobile healthcare app, all the way to an implantable, like my company, an implantable neurostimulator. You can be in other words, in the kind of the hard implantable space. You can be in the software space. You can be in the software as a service space. You can be in, a broad range of areas that all fall under med tech, and we call it like med tech adjacent. So really, we kind of have opened up the range of types of companies. You do have to be a company that's kind of in that pre-seed or seed stage, because that's really where we're losing the companies. They're not able to we don't have friends and family like that. That the data shows it, especially for Black founders and Latinx founders. It's just because of systemic injustices that you don't have the generations of wealth to have that. And so that because that doesn't exist, we're creating an opportunity. How do we get you some friends and family money, again, build your social capital in ways that you wouldn't have access? So it's for Black and Latinx founders in the healthcare space. They can go to the website and see specifically the different breakdown of the categories in that space, but it really covers the full gamut. There's nothing that we really left out. And again, we're looking for, we said the early stage, you want a company that has at least a minimally viable prototype or heading in that direction, significantly in that direction, to apply for this competition. But nobody should not apply. So apply, you have nothing to lose. It's a very short application. And so I encourage everybody to apply.
And next year or in future competitions, I'm not sure if this is what you were suggesting earlier, but do you want to have Medtronic or Boston Scientific or Baxter, are other companies involved in this?
Absolutely. Some of those companies on that list, they actually end up being involved in this year.
All right.
So we're still working out some of those partnerships. So hopefully that will be happening this year. But we want every major player in this space to be involved, and not just involved from a capital standpoint, although that is super critically important. We need that. I mean, you can't operate without that. But from a more intimate standpoint too, of, hey, we are going to actually incubate and be part of this startup ecosystem in an active way on this seed level, instead of just waiting and saying, well, what it's like the survival of the fittest. And then when we're ready to acquire, at the end, well, by that time, unfortunately, a lot of these companies have already been filtered out because they just didn't have the access to capital that they needed. They didn't have the social connections that they needed, the social capital that they needed to make it to that phase. But there's some phenomenal technologies coming out of these companies. And so we don't want the Medtronics and the Boston Scientifics and the Baxters and the Strykers and the Johnson & Johnsons to miss out on critical acquisitions because the technology that they've been dying for and wanting, and it's going to expand the marketplace for them, didn't make it because they couldn't get past the first stage due to funding. I mean, that's a terrible way to lose out on a market opportunity.
Great. Well, I love pitch contests as well, so we'll definitely be tracking the winners of this. And thanks for sharing your story on the podcast. It was great having you today.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to make it, and thank you again for inviting me.
It was great connecting with Angelique Johnson and hearing about the MedtechColor Pitch Competition. We hope to have the winners of the competition on a future Device Talks podcast, so it'd be good to listen to their stories. Now is the time for us to share our social media contacts. Brian Buntz, you are the visiting guest. Please let folks know how they can find you on social media.
You can find me on LinkedIn. I think we're the only Brian Buntzes there, so I'm pretty easy to find.
Chris Newmarker, what about yourself?
I'm on LinkedIn too, and yeah, there are not many new markers around the world either. So I think you could find me on LinkedIn as well, just like a new marker.
Excellent, and there aren't a lot of Salemis, but you can find me on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi. I'm also on Twitter at MedtechTom, and I've just signed up on Clubhouse, which is intriguing. So I'm at MedtechTom there. If any of you folks are involved in the new Clubhouse app, we'll see where that leads us. But more ways to reach out to our MedTech community. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on this Device Talks Weekly podcast. Brian, thanks for telling us your Dexcom story.
Thanks. Appreciate it. It was fun talking about the CGM.
Very cool. This was a great discussion. We got to have you on more, Brian.
Chris, thanks for playing Newmarker's Newsmakers Jeopardy. Tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the Device Talks Weekly podcast waiting for you.
Da, 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 da.